Hello there, this is Miss Alarcon. I'm going to try and walk you through the test that you just took on the scientific method, the metric system, and lab safety as if you were taking it. So I'm logging on to the Test Wizard test program as if I were somebody called test subject, like a test student, just so I can play the student part. But I'm going to kind of tell you how I would think about how to approach the questions as we go. So I'm clicking here to start, and this is going to be the first question. In order to make observations, an observer must always use, we talked about observations versus inferences. We said that observations were things that were always seen, touched, tasted, heard. It has to do with the five senses, right? So that's the answer, the senses. Versus inferences, which you're just going to use previous knowledge and you're going to come up with a possible explanation as to something that happened. Like you went outside in the morning to get the newspaper and it was wet, and so you infer that it must have rained or the neighbor's sprinkler came on. Once I hit that first answer, I'm going to come up here and hit save, just in case I get called away, and then I know that the one that I did is at least there. Now I'm going to go up here to next. Number 2, base your answer on a student set up with the experiment shown below to compare the effects of green and white light on the growth of two identical plants. So that's telling me that the independent variable then is the effect of the light, the color of the light. So one's going to get green and one's going to get white light. Everything else should be identical. Okay, now we go on. What's wrong with the setup of this investigation? Looking at it, one of them has soil and water, and one of them has sand and water. The only thing that should be different with the two of these things is the color of the light. So let's pick our answer now. A, both plants receive the same amount of water. Well, they should. B, one plant is grown with green light and one's grown with white light. There's nothing wrong with that because that's what we're testing. C, one plant is grown in sand and one plant is grown in soil. That looks like it could be it, but let's just read D in case. D, both plants are grown in the same size container. They should be, because everything should be exactly the same except for the color light. Therefore, it has to be C. So we're going to hit C, and then we're going to hit save. Okay, now we're going to go on to the next one. Up here, click next. The analysis of data gathered during a particular experiment is necessary in order to, and there was a question exactly like this on your review sheet. And if you think back to the 7 steps of the scientific method, it's state the problem, gather info, form your hypothesis, perform the procedure, gather and analyze the data, draw a conclusion, and then it must be repeated. So the analysis of data gathered during the experiment is necessary in order to, the thing that comes next is draw a conclusion. So let's look for that. A, formulate a hypothesis? No, that was done way back in step 3. Develop a research plan. We've already had the plan and done that. We've already performed the experiment. That's why we have data. Design a control for the experiment. We had to do that way back before we even set out to do the whole procedure, because you had to know what you were doing. So it must be D, draw a valid conclusion. So it's really just common sense, knowing the steps of the scientific method and what would come after that. Now I hit save. Go on to the next one. A student conducted an original, well-designed experiment carefully following proper scientific procedure. In order for the conclusion to become generally accepted, the experiment must, we said that it's got to be tested by a large number of test subjects. It's got to be able to be repeatable. People have to get the same results in other countries. So let's look at the answers they have. A, contains several experimental variables. That can't be true. The only one that can be different is the independent variable, not a bunch of different ones. B, be repeated to verify the reliability of the data. Ah, there you go. That sounds pretty good. It's got to be repeatable in order to be considered valid. C, support the original hypothesis. Let's see, go back to the question. In order for the conclusion to become generally accepted, it must support the original hypothesis? Well, kind of, but be conducted by a scientist is D? No, not necessarily. So it doesn't have to, in order for the conclusion to become generally accepted, the experiment must be repeated to verify the reliability of the data is my answer. Because you want it to be able to be done by other people and they still get the same results. Okay? So now where are we? Now the next one. In an experiment, what should be the relationship between the control group and the experimental group? They should be identical in every single way except for that independent variable. Everything else should be held constant. So let's take a look. A, they should be different in size. No, not unless there was something having to do with size that was being tested, but that doesn't make sense. They should resemble each other in at least two respects. No, they should resemble each other in every respect except for that independent variable. C, they should not be similar in any respect. That's ridiculous. D, they should be identical in all respects except one. There you go. It's got to be D. I hope that that's easy for you guys to see. Save to change. Okay, now we go on. Number 6. Base your answer on the diagram below and your knowledge of biology. Which statement describes two unsafe laboratory practices represented in the diagram? I know he doesn't have goggles on, and I know that test tubes should not be pointed at him. So this was even on your quiz, I think, this exact same question. So let's look at their answers. A, the flame is too high and the test tube is unstoppered. We don't know anything about the flame. We've never worked with a Bunsen burner, really, so I would never ask you that. And to stopper something that's being heated up could be very dangerous because it's just going to make pressure build inside. We've never talked about that, so that would never be the answer. B, the opening of the test tube is pointed toward the student and the student is not wearing goggles. There you go, bingo. Let's just see if C and D are any better, though. C, the test tube is unstoppered and the student is not wearing goggles. Again, there's that unstoppered thing. We never talked about that. It's never going to be an answer that we have not talked about. D, the beaker has water in it and the flame is under the tripod. Well, the flame is supposed to be under the tripod, and let's hope the beaker has something in it if you're heating it up, and usually it's in water or some kind of aqueous solution. Otherwise, you're going to be heating up a glass test tube that's just going to fizzle and crack over time, like a coffee pot that's left on the burner too long with no coffee on it would just eventually crack. So you have to have some kind of a liquid in there to take that heat away from the flame. Alright, so it has to be B. That was the easy one, I hope. Save and go on. Next one, 7. In a scientific investigation, after the problem is defined and information is gathered, okay, we said number 1 was problem. I told you to jot 7 steps down on your test somewhere so you could refer back to it. That's fine. That's not cheating. You did it out of your head. It's not like you copied it down before you put your stuff away. It just came from your head. So number 1, state the problem. Number 2, gather the information. Number 3 is define your hypothesis, write your hypothesis. 4 is do the procedure, right? So in a scientific investigation, after the problem's defined and information is gathered, the next step is to write your hypothesis. Formulating a hypothesis. I'm sorry if the word formulating throws you. That's the same thing as coming up with or writing a hypothesis, so we have to work a little bit on our vocabulary, but you should recognize the word hypothesis. Identifying needed equipment, well, you're kind of writing out your procedure after that. And that's the same thing as designing the experiment. And then you're not going to collect your data until step 5, so that's not it. So it has to be the one that says formulating a hypothesis. And you had this exact thing on your review sheet as well. I think it's on your review sheet is question 26. So save and go on. Next one. In 1910, Thomas Morgan discovered a certain pattern of inheritance in fruit flies known as sex linkage. The discovery extended the ideas of inheritance that Gregor Mendel had discovered while working with garden peas in 1865. Which principle of scientific inquiry does this illustrate? This sounds so complicated because it's got these scientist names and these principles that we haven't talked about yet, but we're going to. And it's really not as bad as it seems. What I told you to zero in on for this one was to underline, and your test is out of order with this a little bit, by the way, they jumbled them up a little bit, but I think on your test it was question 9, but I told you to underline the discovery extended the ideas. So anytime you're extending the ideas, it's like new information is coming to light. So as new information is discovered, it could change some scientific theories. All right, let's take a look at these answers. A control group must be a part of a valid experiment. True, but what does that have to do with the price of tea in China? Or with this question, right? B, scientific explanations can be modified as new evidence is found. Oh, that sounds pretty good, but let's check out C and D. The same experiment must be repeated many times to validate the results. That's true also, but does that have anything to do with some new kind of principles being discovered? Let's look at D. Values can be used to make ethical decisions about scientific discovery. We have no idea what kind of ethical decisions are being made or what they're talking about, so that would never be asked of you. If it's not something that you know and you studied, like I wouldn't try to trick you with something like that. So that doesn't make sense. So it's got to be B. Scientific explanations can be modified as new evidence is found. Just like we talked about with the atoms and the electrons and the protons and the neutrons, and then they come up with these quarks that they said are even smaller. Okay, hopefully that makes you remember. You hit save, okay, we'll go to the next one. Which statement best describes a scientific theory? This was on your review sheet as well. I can't remember what number it was, but it was on your review sheet. A collection of data designed to provide support for a prediction? No, you're not trying to provide support for a prediction. You're actually testing it out and seeing what you come up with. You're not trying to like rig it so that your hypothesis ended up correct. That's cheating. B, it's an educated guess that can be tested by experimentation. Well, they used to refer to it as an educated guess, but let's see what else they have here. C, it is a scientific fact. Is it a fact that no longer requires any evidence? Oh, no, no, no. How about, let's look at D. It is a general statement that is supported by many scientific observations. That's sounding good, doesn't it? Because you don't want to say, they used to define a hypothesis as an educated guess, not a theory. That's where they got us. They used to say the hypothesis was an educated guess. I even got thrown when I was reading the wording, but it's asking you about a theory. So that's a general statement that's been tested and has stood the test of time, and it's pretty well written in stone, but, you know, again, if something new comes along, then it can be changed. It's not quite as solid as a law, but, you know, it's been around and it's pretty held in pretty high regard. Let's put it that way. So it's a general statement that's supported by many scientific observations. And then I think this recording is going to end in a couple of seconds, so I'll have to pick back up with question number 10, and I'll have to start this recording over again. So I'll be back.